This is China's Lus Plateau. Until recently, this was one of the poorest regions in the country. A land renowned for floods, mudslides, and famine. But with the fanfare comes the hope of change for the better. My name is John D. Liu. I've been documenting the changes on the plateau for 15 years. I first came here in 1995 to film an ambitious project where local people were constructing a new landscape on a vast scale, transforming a barren land into a green and fertile one. The project certainly changed my life, convincing me to become a soil scientist. The lessons I've learned in the last few years have made me realize that many of the human tragedies that we regularly witness around the world, the floods, mudslides, droughts, and famines, are not inevitable. Here on the Lus Plateau, I've witnessed that people can lift themselves out of poverty. They can radically improve their environment, and by doing so, reduce the threat of climate change. One thing that became apparent early on is the connection between damaged environments and human poverty. In many parts of the world, there's been a vicious cycle. Continuous use of the land has led to subsistence agriculture, and generation by generation, this has further degraded the soils. The vital question we have to ask is, can this destructive process be reversed? When I first filmed Mr. Ta Fuyuan and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. As a result of its success, the lessons learned from the Lus Plateau rehabilitation are now being applied all over China. But could such projects work elsewhere in less centrally controlled societies, with fewer resources and different soils? Ethiopia, perhaps more than any other country, has come to symbolize the vulnerability of humankind to environmental catastrophe. This is a country whose problems have been increased by war and civil conflict. And now, human-induced climate change is predicted to make matters worse. As on the Lus Plateau, centuries of subsistence farming practices have stripped the land of natural vegetation. The dry gullies bear the scars of flash floods. These gullies are evidence of the enormous power of runoff during the rainy season. Without vegetation cover on the hillsides, when the rains come, the water doesn't soak into the ground but flows away in a flood. Then it's not available for agriculture during the rest of the year. This leads to drought, and famously for Ethiopia, famine. But just as I've witnessed in China, there is hope that the situation here can be reversed.
Yeah, that root could survive? No.
In just 6 years, Professor Legessa Nagash and local villagers have transformed a severely eroded terrain by planting indigenous trees and plants. Almost miraculously, a clear flowing stream has emerged, where once there was a muddy trickle.
How is it that it's possible for you to get the stream to flow throughout the year?
It is because of the vegetation cover, which has been regenerating on this mountain. This water is maintained in the landscape because as soon as rain falls on the canopy on this vegetation, that rain then infiltrated gradually into the ground, ending up with this steady flow of this river.
If we were to restore the vast areas of the planet where we humans have degraded the soils, just think what an impact we would have in taking carbon out of the atmosphere. As much as a quarter of the world's land mass has been degraded, and much could be rehabilitated in the way we have seen on the Loess Plateau. And we've only just begun to recognize the real value of natural capital. Surely investing in the recovery of damaged environments is a cost-effective way of solving many of the problems we face today. What we've seen in China, in Africa, and around the world is that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. If we can transfer the capital, the technology, and empower the local people to restore their own environment, it'll have enormous benefits. Restoration can sequester carbon, reduce biodiversity loss, mitigate against flooding, drought, and famine. It can ensure food security for people who are now chronically hungry. Why don't we do this on a global scale? I have been, so in 1995, I was asked to go by the World Bank to film that baseline study. And now it's 21 years later, and I'm still fascinated by the results of this, because what we're seeing is a transformational change, and become a bit philosophical, really. So this is me. Those are my hats. I have a few hats, and I don't want to spend too much time with this because I want to get to some dialogue with you. So I'm going to go a little bit ahead and just talk about some of the things that I started to consider. I started to consider evolution, and I realized that the Earth was a molten rock surrounded by poisonous gases when it first formed, and that over prodigious time it was transformed into a beautiful garden. And I think the engine for this is a biochemical photoreactive process which takes sunlight and water and minerals from the soil and converts it into biological life. And I noticed that each generation of life dies and lays down its body, and it accumulates, and that over really a very, very long period of time, what we've seen is the total colonization of the planet by biological life. The accumulation of enormous amounts of organic matter as each generation of life died and gave up its body, and differentiation and speciation leading to infinite potential variety in genetics. And these trends are, I think, immutable natural laws. And
I mean, how could they be immutable when things are going in the other direction and have been for some time? When we're losing soil.
yeah, well, that's only in a period. It depends on the period that you look at it. So if you look at it from human history, all of human history is a moment in evolutionary time. So these laws will reassert themselves.
Yeah,
And
will you leave the scene, or?
possibly, unless we become conscious. If we become conscious of how these systems function, then we can align our behavior with them. If we don't, then we can try to interrupt them, but it won't work because we will be eliminated from the scene.
Well, do you think that Monsanto and chemical agriculture wants to be enlightened? They want to make a profit.
Well, let's
Okay,
go through.
I withdraw from it.
Okay. You know, I think there are many things which separate us, but I think it's kind of important to find the things which bring us together. And I believe that we're all related to each other. Even the people in big corporations are related to all the other people who are alive on the earth. In fact, everyone who's alive is a representation of all life since the beginning of time. It can't be any other way. So the question is whether we are conscious and understand who we are and what our intentions are. So I think if our intentions are to make profit, then I think that that's a fairly low level of consciousness. And I think that there is a possibility to understand more. So I think that the evolutionary processes are extremely important. Understanding these evolutionary processes are very important. And to understand that when human beings degrade the systems, as they did on the Loess Plateau, and as they did in all the other cradles of civilization, that it's not an inevitable outcome. It's an outcome which is based on acting from selfishness and acting from ignorance. And that if we were to act from consciousness and knowledge and generosity, that we would get a different result. So if there are people who are acting from selfishness and ignorance, they need to be enlightened. So maybe the very people that we're angry with are the ones we need to have some compassion for and take pity on these people for being so primitive, and maybe encourage them to be enlightened. But I think what I saw was that human beings emerged in paradise. Whether you look at the cosmologies or you look at evolution, either way, human beings emerge in paradise. But then human beings, because they are ignorant, they sinned. And I don't understand the apple and the snake, but I think I can understand what original sin is. I think original sin is the reduction of biodiversity, which leads to the reduction in biomass, which leads to the reduction in the accumulation of organic materials. Because this alters photosynthesis, changes gas exchange. It alters nutrient release by microbial communities and nutrient recycling because there's much less organic material. And it massively changes the infiltration and retention of moisture, which is the natural regulation of the water cycle, the weather, and the climate. And so the outcomes which we are experiencing, climate change, thermal expansions, increases in cyclonic activity, are understandable. And so if we understand them, then it's a responsibility to react to what we understand. We can't continue to do what we know is causing these outcomes, because we can predict the end of human civilization with this. Because if you play the scenario far enough, then it crashes the system, as all the civilizations that destroyed their ecosystems did. So, you know, for me, I was a cameraman, a news cameraman. I went overseas to take pictures of the big geopolitical events that were taking place in the world. I covered all the major political leaders, So Nixon and Carter and Reagan and the Bushes and Clinton and Obama, I've covered all of this stuff. Brezhnev, Deng Xiaoping, the Queen of England, and so on. All of these various things for international news. International terrorism, I covered the rise of China from poverty and isolation, international terrorism, Tiananmen, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But then, in 1995, the World Bank asked me to go look at the Loess Plateau. And when I looked at the Loess Plateau, I realized that the ecological outcomes are more important than the geopolitical events. That the geopolitical events are a type of illusion. It's like samsara, if you know Indian philosophy, or Buddhist thinking that we're in the wheel of suffering. And until we become much more conscious, we're clutching to these things. And I don't think it's only people in corporations. I think there are a lot of people who are living in an illusion. And, but what I found on the Loess Plateau is that I could see through time. I like your song on time because I could see geologic time, I could see evolutionary time, I could see human history leading to a cathartic moment where the ecosystems collapse, which ends the human civilization. And what's interesting about this is we're there now, but we're not there in the way that an ethnic group in a regional area was. We're there as a species on a planetary scale because we're affecting planetary systems. So we need to understand the scale, the size of the problem. So I'm gonna move on and stop this for a minute and address, because I think since it comes up quite a lot, I found that actually what we're seeing is something which is understandable. We can understand what the degradation is. We can understand who did it, when it happened, where it happened, exactly what happened. And it brings us to a question of why. Why did this happen? And so I started to consider this, and I think it is connected to human economics. So this is a short film called Real Wealth. The world is facing multiple problems. We have biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, food insecurity, poverty, disparity, and now the threat of financial collapse. It seems like there are two conversations going on. One in the developed world, which is talking about economics and technical solutions, and another one in the developing world, which is talking about survival and sustainability. I've begun to see this differently. When it comes to survival and sustainability, there's only one story for the human species, and we're all in this together. All our problems are interrelated. Far from being mysterious, they're actually the logical outcomes of the type of economic system that we've created. And this also seems to point toward the solution. We know when we see a forest, a lake, the ocean, a natural river system, the atmosphere, that it's more valuable than computers, cars, or airplanes, which are valuable for a short time, but then become trash and pollution. Natural systems are renewable. They've evolved over billions of years, and they are infinitely valuable. Now, the global economy values production and consumption. And although few understand it, speculation. This has suggested the finite derivatives shaped from the Earth's natural systems are somehow more valuable than the infinitely renewable systems themselves. This is simply wrong. We need to admit that we made this mistake. If we were to truly value natural systems, then nature would become the basis of our money and our economy. To protect nature, then, would not be a luxury, but a necessity. This brings us much closer to the truth, because we must have water, air, and fertile soils. But we just want computers, cars, and airplanes. We can change. It will not be easy, but we can and we must do it. I think there are two possibilities. If we are thoughtful and do the right thing, then we can consciously transition to a new paradigm in which human actions and the natural environment are in harmony. The other possibility is that the current system implodes from its own corruption and mistakes, and we are forced to try to salvage whatever we can of human civilization. For the sake of the children and future generations of life, we need to consciously decide to do the right thing. When we do that, we'll understand that wealth is coming from natural ecosystem function. And this will be the basis of our money. And all human actions will go to conserving and protecting and restoring ecological function on Earth. We need to shift societal intent away from the production and consumption and waste of the economic system as we see it now, and realize that wealth is coming from natural ecosystem function. If we run out of water, if we run out of fertile soils, if we run out of air, if we alter the climate, our money is worthless. We have to understand that the true wealth on the earth is coming from natural ecological function. And if we do this, if we choose this, then our money and our economy will reflect that. And all human activity will go toward conservation and, wherever the land is degraded, restoration. Because that's the way to protect wealth, and that's the way to increase wealth. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about economics. But I think that what we're seeing is, and what I learned was that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. And if it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, we have a responsibility to do this. And I've also seen that I think that in a way we're now forced to come to grips with this, because we can't go further down the existing path because we can see predictable catastrophic outcomes. That's what science tells us. This direction, the direction that we're going, the idea that we could infinitely grow the economy based on finite resources, or the fact that it's somehow okay to massively stratify the social status of people so that you have some people who have unbelievable individuals with more money than several African nations. I mean, it might be legal because the law serves those who wrote the law, but it can't be right. It can't be right for an individual to have the opportunity to say, well, these people will live and those people will die, or I'll solve this disease and not that disease. That's outrageous. So what I think has come to my mind is that this is an opportunity too. So if you know Chinese characters, Chinese language, crisis is wei ji, and it means danger and opportunity. So this is a danger, it's a very dangerous time. But it's also the opportunity and it's a requirement for us to move to the next level of human civilization. It's a paradigm shift similar to the end of slavery or similar to the flat earth, round earth paradigm change. So in the flat earth paradigm, you had laws and institutions which demanded that you believe this. And if there was evidence that no, the earth is not flat, it's round and it spins and wobbles and goes around the sun, you couldn't say this because the institutions and the laws said, no, you must believe the dogma. Well, now we have another kind of dogma because we have this economy which is driving to consumption, to materialism. And this materialism has been imposed on all the indigenous people around the world. And their cosmologies, their understanding was that life was sacred and that all living things were sacred. And they didn't believe in ownership. They didn't believe in this materialism. But now it's been forced on them. And what has happened in the few hundred years since this has happened? The great forests of the earth, the massive savannas, the megafauna, they've all been damaged. So we need to realize, and simultaneously, we're now in a position where the climate is changing. The oceans could acidify. We have these kind of massive planetary possibilities which are unthinkable, really. I mean, if we can't, it's unfathomable to imagine if all the skeletons and exoskeletons of ocean life were to dissolve. We must work together for the rest of our lives. And that will not be long enough. But that will allow human civilization to shift toward the path where there will be potentially evolutionary outcomes. So the evolutionary outcomes, what the earth wants to do, what life wants to do, is what we want to do, is what we need. Actually, we don't yet know that we want this. A lot of us want other things, but when we understand that we're breathing air, that we're filtering every pollutant that exists, then we will want an evolutionary outcome. And the only way humans will ever see an evolutionary outcome is to align our behavior with the natural laws of total colonization of the planet by biological life, constant accumulation as each generation dies and gives up its body, and the differentiation and speciation leading to infinite potential variety in genetics. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do. The fact is that the trends for production, consumption, pollution are still intense. But I don't think, ignorance, if we understand that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, and we understand why the degradation is taking place, we are obligated to go there. So I think actually education and making people aware of what's happening is a good thing, because you can't then, if you choose to be selfish, and you can't say you're ignorant once you've been educated about this. So the only way forward, if you want to continue to do the wrong things, is through greed. And at that point, with knowledge, if you act from greed, you're culpable. So this is a legal difference. If people act ignorantly, they're kind of innocent. Ignorance is actually a pretty good excuse in this case. So 500 generations of people have pretty much trashed large areas of the planet. So the fact that 500 generations of humans did that, means that it's kind of, the guilt thing is kind of dissipated somehow. But once you understand it, you're obligated to change. So I think we are at a turning point in human history. An era is ending. It's over, really. You know, we can't burn the remaining fossil fuel reserves because the outcomes scientifically are known. That's suicide to do that. We can't do that. So we have to have a different kind of social organization. We have to have a different intention. The intention of and we know where this economy comes from. It comes from divine right, and from slavery, and from feudalism, and from imperialism and colonization and mercantile expansion after the Industrial Revolution. Now that's not, I think we need to say that dispassionately, to not say I'm angry because all this took place. It did take place, it's not a nice thing, but we're not going to be able to go back and change it. It happened. So we need to actually tell the truth and absorb this and say, well, okay, we didn't do that, but we inherited the results of that. And what we do now will determine what the future will be. So we're deciding now. It's now we're either going to do the right thing and future generations are going to say, well, you know, what did they do? And if we do the wrong thing, then they're going to say, what were you thinking about? So I've known that for decades. And all my work is public. So you can see a progression of everything that I've done for 20-some years. And even before that, it's public, but it all belongs to CBS. So, and it's less interesting to me because nobody talks about Brezhnev or Deng Xiaoping or Carter. You know, they all talk about the ecological understandings that are changing. And these are in all the MOOCs around the world, all the universities, all the people, all the UN agencies, everybody is using the same material. And so this is important because we need everybody to have the same understanding. So we have to tell the children, and we have to tell the grandparents, and we have to tell the policymakers, all because they have to have the same understanding so that they can make the same choices. Now, there are, this is the thing that I was talking about. So this is a shelter belt, which has been put through the second largest sand desert. The fact that you can do this is ridiculous. You know, I mean, this is just unbelievable. So to put a shelter belt through the Taklamakan desert. Taklamakan means, in the local language, you go in but you don't come out. That's the name of it. And what they did here, to me, it doesn't say, let's go do this, because they put a pumping station every 4 kilometers. And it's solar powered, that's okay. It uses Israeli type drip irrigation, that's okay. And the water that they found, it doesn't decrease because there's so much of it, and this is just a corridor. But they identified 3 salt tolerant, because the saline, I think it's 3 to 30% saline, something like that. I'm not sure the exact things anymore, but it's very saline. And they identified 3 species which were salt tolerant, and they planted these out. But they're getting back, I mean, hares are in the middle of the Taklamakan, and foxes are chasing the hares, and you know, but the fact that this can be done doesn't mean that this is what we should do. It means that we can do it. It means that if we go to the Mediterranean, if we go to the Middle East, if we go to North Africa, the Sahelian region, Central Asia, where there are large areas that are degraded, we can restore these areas. And if we restore these areas, we will change temperature differentials. Now, if you understand the cyclonic activities that we're having in storms, they're increasing in intensity and in frequency. And they're caused by temperature differentials. And the temperature differentials on the exposed soils and between here are 45 degrees centigrade. So this is a very interesting, from a scientific perspective. I don't see that huge range except because this is an extreme environment. But if I go to the Mediterranean and I restore an oak savanna in Andalusia, for instance, then I know that temperatures will go down. And I know that the density of the air will be heavier and it'll be much more difficult to create cyclonic activity. The incidence of cyclonic activity between the tropics is increasing by, it's doubling every decade. Now that kind of period is very troubling from a scientific perspective, because if you imagine human history is the last 2 seconds or something like this of all of geologic and evolutionary time, if you're having that kind of period, it's coming. And so it's interesting. I started studying this just as a complete, I didn't know anything about it. Hello, I'm John Liu, and I'd like to make a short presentation about the Ecosystem Restoration Cooperative and the Ecosystem Restoration Camps. Over the last 20-some years, I've been studying ecosystem function and dysfunction in terrestrial ecosystems. And I found that actually modern society and modern economy have gone very far away from what we understand about how the atmosphere, the hydrological cycle, the soil fertility, climate regulation are created and how they're constantly filtered and continuously renewed. And I found also that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So it's not necessary to accept degraded states. It depends on what we understand and what we do. Over the years, I've been wondering, how can we engage the largest numbers of people in what we know we need to do, which is get carbon into the biomass and into the organic matter, to re-regulate the hydrological cycle, to protect biodiversity, to mitigate against extreme temperatures, artificially elevated temperatures and artificially elevated evaporation rates. How can we do that? If I look at the permaculture movement and I look at the people who are actually sequestering carbon, so the people who are growing their own compost and who are increasing the vegetative cover on their landscapes, they're the ones who are doing the most to mitigate and adapt to climate change on the planet. Now, how could we take that energy and that knowledge and engage millions and hundreds of millions and billions of people to do this work on a larger scale? Recently, I was in Spain, and our foundation is supporting another cooperative and people who are working to restore, but they have a problem because there are very few people left in the area. It's called territorios abandonados. So the people, young people especially, have all left. And the landscape is sort of a ruin, but it's not that difficult, finally, to restore it if we try. And I thought, well, why don't we just put a camp here? We have now been invited to put a camp there if we can and want to. For 5 years, we can have a camp there where people can study and actually do ecological restoration at large scale. And my thought was, well, how do we do this? Who owns this? How does this work? And that's where the concept of the cooperative came into being. I don't think that the big institutions are really able to do what needs to be done right now. They've had decades to
do the right thing, and they use tremendous amounts of money, and they're very inefficient. I don't have much confidence in their ability to act quickly and engage the largest numbers of people. Could we create a cooperative so that the actual governance is done horizontally by we the people? And I started to think about this. If we all join together, we're much more powerful than if we're by ourselves. And what do we like to do? We like to garden, and we like to go camping. So why don't we combine these things and create camps? And in these camps, make them really good fun. Make sure that we have 3 meals a day of great organic food. And make sure that we are not working too much, so limit the amount of work. But let's make sure that we have, that they're aesthetically really pleasing, they're really beautiful. They have the best yurts. They have geodesic domes where we can have the meals, where there's places for theoretical study. Let's realize that we're at the end of the fossil fuel era. So let's envision a post-fossil fuel era and not use any fossil fuels inside the camp. Let's have biogas for the kitchen. Let's have solar and potentially wind or other energy sources. And let's not use very much energy. Let's use pedal power when we can. Let's use horses. And let's reduce the work to maybe 5 hours a day. Let's not work terribly long. Let's work efficiently. Let's work as teams. And let's have a lot of fun. Let's have a more profound conversation. I thought about what I feel like in the society now, whether I'm in any country around the world now. It's all the same. It's filled with restaurants and stores and the media, the advertising, the conversations. They're not very profound. They're kind of trivial and maybe profane and sometimes prejudice and brutalistic. We don't need that. Let's have a happier time. And I realized that if we grow a movement with lots of people, it's going to be pretty easy to build camps. And we'll be able to have camps everywhere. Already people have asked us to put camps into Bhutan and Nepal and Kenya and Uganda and Peru. We hope that more people will consider this, will think about this. Could we join together and do what we need to do? Could we train the largest numbers of people? Could we work in all the places that are degraded around the world? Could we do this quickly, efficiently? Because we need to act now. I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is that we can have some fun and we can restore a little piece of paradise every day. This effort is owned by the people, and already people from 50 countries have signed up. When we get to 1,000, we'll be able to build the first camp. Each member is pledging 120 euros per year. So when we get to 1,000, we'll have raised 120,000 euros to build the first camp in Spain. I think we'll also open up the opportunity to have other funds from different organizations, but I don't think we want the existing organizations to be in charge. I think we want a cooperative of individuals, of people, because we can make decisions faster. And maybe we can work with retired people who don't actually need a job. And we can maybe direct this toward refugee situations or disaster situations, or the homeless, or the veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So the possibilities are really large, but we need to start. I think this is something that we can do, and we have to realize that it's something that we're called to do and we're obligated to do. More than 4,600 people joined the Facebook page in 10 weeks to discuss this. And what I've seen is that when we do this, we can actually accomplish quite a lot. We can bring back perennial stream flows. The satisfaction when you see a stream that hasn't flowed for some time return and water bubble out of the ground again in a spring, this is fantastic. This is what we need to see and know and to realize. This is not magical. It's depending on our consciousness and our actions. If we understand how these principles work, we can do that. If we ignore them, if we think that our cell phones and our cars and our airplanes and our houses are more important than the Earth's natural ecosystem function, then I think we're in really bad shape. We're going to start by putting in woodworking and metalworking fabrication shops. So we'll actually be able to produce the camps ourselves. When we're very good at producing camps, we're very good at camping. We're training the largest number of people in how to grow soils, how to grow plants, how to identify plants, how to save seeds, and this is much better than doing nothing at the time when we have a massive crisis. I hope that you'll think about this and join with the other people who have already become members of the cooperative and think about how you would work together with others to organize the cooperative and how you would work with others to organize camps around the world and what you would do in these camps in terms of training, in terms of restoration, and in terms of recreation and culture, and in terms of peace building, in terms of making the world safer. I think this is a practical, low-cost, immediate step, and we need to take it. Thanks.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. Where's the money coming from for all of these activities? You think 150 euros per person per year?
120. It's enough to start if we're talking, everyone's a volunteer who's working in it.
No, I understand that. I'm just talking about the materials and such. You know.
Well, if we,
Where are you getting the land, for example?
well, the land we're being invited to, we're putting the camps in places where we're invited to
Do
go.
you think you can scale this up?
Well, we've already been invited to many, I think we'll never be able to build enough camps. We'll be invited, we are already invited to so many places. So I think if we talk about land ownership or we talk about this kind of thing, that we may have a hard time to do that. But
The use of the land and financing the use of the land. I don't care about the nominal legal ownership.
yeah, well, in this case, we'll have 120,000 euros to build a camp. If if we build the yurts and the things ourselves, we first put in a woodworking and metalworking fabrication shop, and we have craftsmen. You want to join? So we have a carpenter here. So yeah, so we'll have, I'm actually mostly interested in like Formula One mechanics or these guys who do the engines for A380s and 747s, because they retire at 55, that they can't keep going, and they don't need to go play golf and go fishing forever. They need to go out there and take care of the equipment and train young people to do things. So if we design the perfect geodesic domes and the perfect yurts, and we say, let's go camping, but don't bring too many toys to camp. Come and work there, and let's reduce the work so it's not like it's a drudgery. It's like we get satisfaction because we're
we're doing what needs to be done at this time to ensure that future generations will have an Earth. And we can, in this way, we can immediately go to the most degraded places on the Earth, and we can immediately start to restore them. And we can teach the largest number of people the best practices in these ways to restore. And we can have a profound conversation by all the people who are choosing this way of life. And when they go back home, they carry that back with them and a new set of people, and we have a constant turnover, and we make more and more camps to go everywhere. And so pretty soon, we're living in a different kind of society. So if you go to camp for 3 weeks or 3 months, and you never have to pay for anything because there's nothing to buy and nothing for sale, and you have somebody from another culture and another class, and you live in the same type of conditions, and you do the same kind of work, and you help each other, then suddenly a lot of the social differences can change. You can have a more profound conversation.
Sorry, where does the food come from and the medical care?
We now have, well, that's a good question, but right now we have many of the top permaculture designers and trainers who have already joined the cooperative. So I'm not exactly worried about that, because we will send in designers and gardeners before the camp even opens, and it'll be...
What about climate change that's going to result in higher temperatures, which means your seeds aren't going to germinate? And what about the absence of pollinators? I planted the garden. I wanted to do the right thing. I didn't get any eggplant. I didn't get any peppers because there were no pollinators.
Well, if we're looking for all the reasons why we're going to fail, then we're on the right track.
It's better
But
not to fail, so it's better to anticipate.
yeah, well, that's the purpose of. So it's not a theoretical. It's reality. So, are you able to grow things? Yes. When you have polycultures and diversity, does it grow better and have less pests? Yes. You know, so we have the best permaculture designers and trainers, logical landscapes and economic landscapes. So when you release land to nature, that's the fastest restoration. So if you look at Detroit, where 2/3 of the population left, and you go back and you look, are plants taking over? Yes. You know, think Angkor Wat or Machu Picchu. You know, these places where you couldn't even see them. You had to like dig through the vegetation to find them. And so nature wants to go in a certain direction. And in many ways we have interrupted this. And if we stop interrupting this and we give nature some space and we restrict the areas that we alter. So let me show you one more thing here, because we're working with the Common Land Foundation on a transitional economic model, which is also extremely interesting.
Once there was plenty of space, but the population is rapidly increasing, and people are consuming more and more. That has a big impact on our environment and ecosystems. 1/4 of the once fertile land on Earth is now dust and sand as a result of human activity. The quality of our future depends on our ability to change these developments. The good news is it can be done with landscape restoration. That's more than just the recovery of land, because a landscape is also a community. People can revitalize an area. An economy that restores and uses the landscape with sustainable business cases. That's the goal. It all begins with inspiration, with a new future perspective for all those involved, and a common plan for restoration of the landscape. From this, jobs are created, and that leads to social bonding, and, for example, education and security. Restoration also leads to the return of natural capital, such as biodiversity, fertile land, water, and a stable climate. That attracts financial capital, first as an investment, later as a return. This is what we call the four returns. Return of inspiration, return of social capital, return of natural capital, and return of financial capital. To achieve these four returns, we developed three landscape zones. A natural zone in which biodiversity is restored and maintained. A combined zone, which is rehabilitated with farmers working the land. And an economic zone for sustainable business activity. It takes an average of 20 years, in other words, a generation, to restore a landscape. If we start now, we will create the basis for a different world. This is what inspires us.
If anybody's interested in that, I have a little bit of bump here. There's about 1 million hectares already that are being developed through mainly cooperatives. So the local communities are joining together, and the Common Land Foundation is helping them to find financing and to design sustainable activities to replace unsustainable activities. So it's similar to the Chinese. They have a theory U, I think it actually comes out of MIT here, which is a way of co-creating a design process that then leads to the interventions that can, or a business plan that can be financed.
The collab.
Yeah, something, it's presencing, Otto Scharmer, I think is. But what they're doing often is in a way, I think it's good, but I think that what we also need to see is that not everyone is a landowner, not everyone is an investor. So what I'm looking at with the cooperative and the camps is a way to give people the skills that they need to make their lives and their communities as resilient as possible in the face of climate change, and to understand how what is the best way to deal with the hydrological situation, the agricultural situations. There's a lot of other things. I mean, 10 years ago, I was asked to go to Rwanda by the Global Environment Facility, the British government, and the World Bank, and I was able to present to the president and to the prime minister and the parliament and the cabinet and the science faculties and the universities and the press, and we put films on television. This was a very interesting phenomenon because you have a smallish population, and everybody got the same information at the same time. So it was pretty easy for them to say, well, you have to have infiltration, retention of rainfall. You have to have functional ecosystems in order to have food security or to have sustainable outcomes. And they accepted this, and they rewrote their land use policy laws. And when they did that, that was 10 years ago. We have 10 years of data.
Rivers of the White Nile to the east and the Congo River to the west. Recent history in Rwanda has not always been kind. But from profound suffering and sadness, Rwandans are now striving to ensure the future will be peaceful and sustainable.
We do that the responsibility of each nation to find the best ways to adapt, to adjust, to find solutions that don't compromise the sustainable development we are looking for.
The government of Rwanda has created results-based indicators and targets aligned with the Millennium Development Goals, including the Rwanda Vision 2020 and the Economic Development and Poverty Reduction Strategy.
Environment is closely related to poverty, because when you don't manage well the natural resources, at the end of the day, the poorest are the most affected.
Today, around 86% of the Rwandans use wood as their energy. And we want to reduce that to at least maximum 50% by the year 2020.
By carefully stating national aims, the government of Rwanda has for many years provided an integrated policy that stresses sustainable development. Building on its long-term core strategies, Rwanda has continued to develop additional innovative green economic initiatives.
And this is what we chose as Rwanda as we decided to elaborate our national strategy on climate change and low carbon development.
One area that is getting specific attention is energy.
We have a target of increasing our electricity generation. Today we are at about 97 megawatts, and we want to increase that to 1,000 megawatts in the next 8 years. And we are targeting that about 80% or so of that source of energy should be renewable energy, mainly from hydropower electricity and from geothermal. So from 2014, we want to be producing any electricity from fossil fuels.
A number of initiatives have responded to a growing understanding of the relationship between ecological function and human-induced climate change, including the Rwanda Land Use Master Plan and the Rwanda Forest and Landscape Restoration Initiative.
There are two major undertakings that we have within our institution. One, which was the development of the National Land Use Master Plan. The other major program is the land registration program. We also believe that with the registration of land, people get security of tenure. From the results we've got from the pilot, there's a positive indication that with secure tenure, people are able to invest more and care better for their land. We are giving ourselves maybe 3 years of growth, so that by 2020 we have 30% of actually forested area. So it's now really an aggressive campaign across the country to restore destroyed forests.
There has been a lot of restoration that has been carried out relating to environment. And we've seen that restoration grow from year to another year.
The programs go far beyond traditional reforestation to address degradation from a diverse landscape perspective.
We are moving to about 85% of our farming systems to be in agroforestry systems. Reason being that we want to stabilize the terraces, the hill slopes, so that to minimize erosion. I believe if we continue in this manner, we are definitely going to have a stable environment, stable ecosystem, and subsequently a stable water system and also the agricultural systems.
Because as individual smallholders, we have no hope of accessing markets at all. So we took up the policy of land conservation to ensure that. And we've been successful at that. We started it 4 years ago, and we as Rwanda now, today, we are very proud to say we are food secure.
These actions and national priorities have been further captured in the National Strategy on Green Growth and Climate Resilience. Linking economic development together with protecting and restoring the ecological function of the land has provided many enviable outcomes.
We've been growing at an average of 8.2%, and we've seen more than 1 million people of population lifted out of poverty in the last 5 years. That's 12% of our population. And we've achieved this within this mode of growth that caters for environment as well.
I think, well, I think we need to be physical. I think we need to go each day and sequester some carbon, re-regulate some of the, of the hydrological things, and protect biodiversity. So if we do this in the camps, we can actually every day, each individual who chooses this is making a contribution. We know that this is the best way that there is. I mean, I've been studying it too long. There's no other way that we're going to sequester carbon except this. You know, the idea that we use a machine, you have to use energy to make the machine, you know, it's a completely ridiculous, you know, outrageous thing when we have a biochemical photoreactive process that evolved over billions of years. Why don't we align with that? The thing about the camps is we can have a kind of simplicity. If we can go in a little bit escape from the types of pressures and things that we're thinking about, and go for a short time or even a longer time into these camps, we can find out what it's like to do what needs to be done as a species now. And if we can do that with people from all different countries, and we can bring the local communities and international people together and act in this way, then, you know, when we go home from camp, I think we're changed. You know, everything will be a little bit different. We'll hear the sirens more, and we'll notice the anomalies, and the advertising will be really in our faces, and we'll say, I don't really think that's a nice thing. And a lot of the things that we can't see anymore because they're there all the time, they're just, you know, we can avoid. Yeah?
So how many camps have there been? How many are presently operating?
Right now there are no camps. We're building the first camp in April in Spain, yeah. But there are requests to go many places, but it's a question of the resources. Well, the farm that it's on is 2,000 hectares, but the camp will be in 3 to 5 hectares. Yeah.
What is donating
Hmm?
Is the land being donated, or?
It's not a permanent thing. We're going to put the camp there to build composting, to build a nursery system, and to do infiltration and retention and teach that. And we're also going to put in gardens to feed the camp. But the idea is that we learn how to camp well, and we're mobile. And so we can move the camp and build camps where they need to be. And if we get good at this and we have a large number, so we're going to have 1,000 people not in the camp, we're going to have 50 people in the camp, but we're going to have 1,000 people in the cooperative before we build the camp. And we could get more people in the cooperative, and if we could have enough, we could have many people in the cooperative, but let's see how it goes, and let's see if we're effective. So I think we have to consider the problems that are going on in the Middle East. I think we have to think about the degradation in many different places, and how are we going to deal with that? So I don't think sending over more weapons is going to help. I think we're going to have to restore the hydrology and probably remove a lot of toxic substances, and we're going to need to know how to do this. So who's going to do that? Who's going to train to do that? Who's going to choose to do that and volunteer to do that? And I think when we do that, we're creating peace. I think if we don't do that, we're going to go to war. So, you know, right now, I think a lot of people need to come and make their decision. We get to decide what the world will be. We don't have to ask permission. We need to decide what the world will be. Yeah.
And apropos of that, our strategy diplomatically around the world should be every country that we're trying to help, if we're talking Iraq, Iran, Syria, ecological restoration has to be a major component of what we're doing.
I think we have to stop saying our strategy and mean that there's an us and a them, and realize that there's just us. And we have to act as a human species, and that everyone is equal, and that hasn't happened in the past doesn't mean that we have to maintain this idea that we're going somewhere to help other people who are, different. We have to work together. If we're hurting some other culture or some other ethnic group, we're just hurting ourselves. So we need to somehow process what this means. And when we do that, then I think especially the younger people now are ready to look at this. They know this. And I mean, even older people, if I go to the Hopi land, they tell me, "Oh, you've come. we knew about you." Really? You knew about me? What are you talking about? I didn't even know about me. How did you know about me? They say, well, it's prophesied, that people are going to come and they're going to be from many races, and they're not going to differentiate, and they're going to restore the earth. I go, really? That's interesting. Wow, okay. I would say there are 5 things that we've identified. Awareness that it can be done. So if you don't know that it's possible to restore large-scale damaged ecosystems, you will never try. But if you do know, then you're obligated to do it.
Is this the optimism?
I think it is. It's a responsibility. It's not just optimism. It's just a requirement. If you're going to do restoration, you have to have enough technical and scientific understanding to launch and to do it. But you also need a proactive, adaptive management system so that you measure all the impacts, and if you're making if there are any unintended consequences, you can adapt quickly. So you need to be ready to think, my hypothesis wasn't perfect, maybe, and I need to do this. But we do know that there are principles, that the percentages and total amounts of biomass and the percentages and total amounts of organic matter are influencing everything, the photosynthesis, fertility, infiltration, and retention. So if we have this discussion consistently, and everybody knows this needs to be ecological literacy. This is not some kind of specialized understanding. It needs to be literacy. And so if we all have this level of understanding, we're doing what we know, and we're continuing to study it. There's a lot to learn. These are very complex systems. So they're sort of infinitely fascinating. So, if we follow the taxonomy of different biomes, well, we can study a methodology. And then we can go to all biomes and we start to learn more, and everybody's talking about it. We can make it a game, Instead of playing these stupid games, we ought to be playing the taxonomy game, really. So then, if you have awareness and scientific and technical ability, then you need policy. So if you now understand it, the policy is already adapted and adopted into all the conventions in the United Nations, which are signed by 197 countries. So in the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Combating Desertification, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Ramsar for wetlands, it's already there. So restoration, the understanding of restoration and the support is in the policy. Next is capital. You need sufficient capital to do this. It's probably the most cost-effective thing that we can do is to restore Earth systems. But if you get down to the commercialization of it, and you try to say each tree costs, how much are we, we don't have enough money. If you have to ask how much it costs, you don't have enough money. But if you get into the idea that this is the responsibility of human beings, and that if we choose to do this, if this is our intention, can we do this? Can we go gather acorns? Can we scarify the seeds and propagate them? Can we plant them out? Can we plant them everywhere? Yes. And so when you get to that level and we're in service, then you find out something else. We're creating value. We're not creating income. and that the value is vastly higher than the income potential, and that the income is a flawed economic thinking which comes from divine right, slavery, imperialism, colonization, and mercantile expansion after the Industrial Revolution, and includes criminal behavior like interest-bearing debt, which is just a way of creating indentured servitude for large numbers of people and flowing resources to a small elite group. So if we could say that out loud, because we have freedom of speech, if we have choice, and we can say, I don't want to do that. I don't believe in slavery. I don't believe in that, you know, one race is better than another. You know, how can we accept these things? They're unacceptable. In my experience, I started to study ecosystem function and dysfunction in terrestrial ecosystems. And actually, I started by studying dysfunction. So I was looking at the historical degradation of ancient civilizations. And they had led to catastrophic outcomes, and so that was an interesting thing. But then I learned that you could restore, that it wasn't an inevitable outcome, it was just depends on your understanding. And that there is a hierarchy of function. So there are functions which are basic ecological functions, and there are higher functions. I would say, for instance, biodiversity is a much higher order of functionality than infiltration and retention of moisture. This is more, one is very, very, you know, physics-based, and you know, so, but they're not actually separate. You can't separate them. So the total colonization of the planet by biological life, the accumulation of organic matter as each generation of life dies, and differentiation and speciation leading to infinite potential variety in genetics. Those are the basis of life as far as I can tell. And what I found was that in the emissions reduction discussion, you have what Al Gore called an inconvenient truth. It's also, unfortunately, a partial truth, because it is been stated as if human impact on the climate is egregious emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Well, that's partially true, but actually it seems to me that this is a symptom of larger systemic dysfunction on a planetary scale. And there's quite a bit of evidence that this is the case. And if you analyze whether reduction of emissions alone and energy efficiency and renewable energies and non-polluting industry or any of that, could any of that rebalance disequilibrium in the carbon cycle in the atmosphere? The answer is no. So, you know, when you get to that understanding, you go, well, something else is happening here. We've got to look at this. And so the fact is that vast areas, 25% of the planet, has been degraded by human beings over historical time. Some of it very recently, but a lot of it over a long period of time. And those changes are the places where we have the highest potential to do something about it, because we're getting hydrological dysfunction, we're getting temperature differentials which are enormous, we're getting loss of fertility, loss of food productivity, food safety, food security. But what finally we have to consider also, your question also connects to this population, because a lot of people think that, well, there are just too many people on the earth, and so we need to, some of them need to die, you know. Well, but so if we're worried about birth rates, for instance, then what I've noticed is that everywhere where there's access to contraception, women's rights, and family planning, the birth rates are flat. In fact, we're getting inverted pyramids in all the developing countries. So if we do, let's imagine ecosystem restoration, vocational training for ecosystem restoration in maybe camps, because that could be done cheaply and rapidly, and very large numbers of people could do that. Maybe we wouldn't have to say anything, but maybe we'd have to make sure that there's a yurt over there with some contraception and some advice on family planning and a strong ethic of equality between the genders. And so I think that's the way forward for us. So that's the fastest way we can compassionately and without authoritarian something cause the birth rates to go flat. So I think we should do that. You know, that's a good idea, but really we need to focus on, without you know, infringing on the rights of people, we need to talk about things that we can agree on. And I think we can all get to the point where we can agree we have to have water. So if the water is dependent on the percentages and total amounts of biomass and the percentages and total amounts of organic matter, then we should massively increase the biomass and massively increase the organic matter. And we can do that. So that's something that we can agree on, and that's something that we can do. And so if we're in this mode where we're saying, well, let's do that, and okay, we need to do that as efficiently, as cost effectively as possible. If we decide we need to create the the international collaborative centers for agricultural research, and we need budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars a year and lots of highly paid scientists, and that's the only way to move forward, and we give tiny amounts of money to desperately poor people and expect them to do the work while the, you know, I don't think that's going to work very well. I think what we need to do is we need to say everybody is equal, and let's all go and at least spend a little time every day in the camps growing some carbon in the soils and in the biomass and restoring biodiversity and, getting to know other cultures. It's not a bad way. And so then we know we're doing something, and as that enlarges, then it also shows the deficiency of the other methods. You know, as soon as you get streams starting to flow and forests returning and, you know, happy, healthy, growing, you know, resilient communities, then suddenly the organizations which are now raising trillions of dollars for climate mitigation and adaptation are obligated to use it, not for the swirling vortex of highly paid consultants, but to endow the people who are voluntarily choosing to act in direct action to ensure the future of humanity and the future of the earth. No, well, I mean, if I look at the Andrews experimental forest on the McKenzie River in Oregon, and I walk through the forest and I look down, I don't see any geologic material. So as far as I can tell, it's 100% organic soils until you go down maybe 1.5 meters or 2 meters or something like that. So if that's an evolutionary outcome, and if you can find a soil in any of these agricultural areas which are over 5%, you know, in organic agriculture, if they're talking about 5% organic matter in the soil, it's high. And there are thresholds for productivity, you know, that where more organic matter might not necessarily increase productivity, but it depends on whether you're talking about function or productivity. So if you're looking for productivity, you know, then it may be a little bit different. So, yeah, I know. You're talking about equilibrium, carbon equilibrium. I think it's doable because of according to Ratan Lal, it's if we add 2% carbon to soil carbon on a planetary scale, we mitigate all human emissions. But you know, if you see organic or permaculture agriculturalists and they have 37% organic matter after it was 0.02 or something in degraded soils, then I think we have enough of an upside from vegetation to get a good result. Really important to realize that looking at the biomass above ground is very helpful because there's 3 to 4 times more soil carbon in the underground than in the biomass above ground. So that means that if the higher and higher we create the canopy and the biomass, we're getting 3 to 4 times more underground. And that is an incredible factor. This carbon sink is second only to calcium carbonates in the ocean. And it's vastly more already than the carbon in the atmosphere, even though we've been blowing off hundreds of millions of years of photosynthesis in a crazed way for 100 years. But well, it's just self-organizing. So the idea is not to do too much recruiting. We probably, I mean, we can't take everybody in the camps right now because we don't have the camps. We're going to build a camp and that'll have 50 people. But that's the one in Spain, because that one we want to be a bit of a showcase, because we expect the UN and the EU and everybody to show up and take a look at this. So we want it to be rather interesting. But the most important thing for us is that it's created and owned and run by the people. Because I think that these big institutions, they're too expensive, they're too slow, and they have some wrong-headed ideas. So, but they are gathering all this money into these climate funds. So what we want to show them is that the people can self-organize and the people can do every day a lot, and they can still have fun. It's not like it's a drudgery to do this. It's a good idea. And when there's 50% youth unemployment in Spain and in Greece and these other places, well, they need some training and they need something to do. And if this is what helps to make your own land and your own community as resilient as possible, it ensures food security. It definitely helps globally to mitigate and adapt to human-induced climate changes. So I think these institutions and these funds are going to be obligated to support this, but I would rather not ask them. I would rather have them offer it and have the people choose to do what they do and not be talking about how much money are we, if we raise this much money, then we'll go and sequester carbon. Well, I don't think that's really what we need to do. I think we need to say, we understand what needs to happen. The hydrology needs to be re-regulated. The biomass and the organic matter need to be massively increased. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. And when we do that, we are creating huge, huge amounts of value. And I think this is the change that is needed in human civilization, to go away from the transactional, materialistic thinking that is limiting our ability. We can't even, we're going to have the 22nd convening of the parties. I mean, that already just tells you it's a failure. It doesn't take 22 meetings to say, oh my goodness, we have the largest existential crisis facing human civilization. We can't do anything. Let's meet next year and have some more shrimp and white wine. It doesn't make any sense. So, you know, it is interesting that much more has been learned, but if you go back historically of what's happened over this time, you know, a lot of it has been wasted time because it took much too long for them to recognize, and they still haven't fully recognized because they make money from you know, using mechanical methods and this kind of thing, but it's not going to work. So they really need to tell the truth that it's obvious and necessary that the polluting industrial and energy concerns have got to reduce their emissions and put in efficiencies, but it shouldn't be the public that has to pay for it. They should pay for it, you know, because they did it. But, you know, we shouldn't have to subsidize them to give them power over everybody for another generation when they cause this massive problem. We should say, no, let's understand what's going on. Let's do what needs to be done. And by doing that, let's change the course of human history to go in a direction that, you know, to live the change we want to see in the world. So if we understand that we have to treat everybody with equality, that we have to wage peace more actively than the people are waging war, then okay, I think, you know, we could try that. There's 7.3 billion people on the earth, and I would say the vast majority of those people want peace. Nobody in their right mind wants war. So let's band together and do it.
That was great, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.